Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome back with me, Miss Ira, in CEFR presentation. Okay, today we are going to talk about chapter 6 of Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, Learning, Teaching, Assessment. Okay, this chapter entitled Language Learning and Teaching. Okay. In this chapter, there are 5 subchapters. The first one is what is that learners have to learn or acquire. The second is the processes of language learning. And the third is kind of framework user to facilitate language learning. And the fourth is some methodological options for modern language learning and teaching. And the fifth or the last is errors and mistakes. Okay, the first subchapter, what is that learners have to learn or acquire? In order to participate with full effectiveness in communicative events, learners must have learned and acquired. The first, the necessary competences. The second, the ability to put these competences into action. And the third is the ability to employ the strategies necessary to bring the competences in action. Okay, and the second is the purpose of representing or steering the progress of language. For the purpose of representing or steering the progress of language learners, it is useful to describe their abilities at a series of successive levels. And then plurilingual competence and pluricultural competence. Plurilingual and pluricultural competence is generally uneven in one or more ways. The first is learners generally attain greater proficiency in one language than the others. And the second is the profile of competences is one language is different than in others. Okay, and then the pluricultural profile refers from the plurilingual, such as imbalance. Okay, next. Differentiated competence allowing for language switching. Okay, and then development of awareness and the process of use and learning. Differentiated competence allowing for language switching. Because of this imbalance, one of the features of plurilingual and pluricultural competence is that in applying this competence, the individual in question draws upon both his or her general and language skills and knowledge in different ways. Okay, and then development of awareness and the process of use and learning. Plurilingual and pluricultural competence also promotes the development of linguistic and communication awareness, and even metacognitive strategies will enable the social agent to become more aware of and control his or her own spontaneous ways of handling tasks and in particular their linguistic dimension. Okay, in addition, this experience of plurilingualism and pluriculturalism, the first is exploit pre-existing sociolinguistic and pragmatic competences, which in turn develops them further. And the second is leads to be better perception of what is general and what is specific concerning the linguistic organization of different languages, from meta-linguistic, interlinguistic, or so to speak, hyperlinguistic awareness. Okay, by its nature, refines knowledge of how to learn and the capacity to enter into relation with others and new situations. All right, the third is partial competence and plurilingual and pluricultural competence. The partial competence in a given language may concern the first, respective language activities. It may concern a particular domain and specific task. The second is general competences, for example, non-linguistic knowledge about the characteristic or of other languages and cultures and their communities. And the fourth is variation in objectives in relation to the framework. Types of objective in relation to the framework. A teaching learning objective may in fact be conceived versus in terms of the development of learners' general competences. And then in terms of extension of diversification of communicative language competence, and it's then concerned with the linguistic component or the pragmatic component or socio-linguistic component or all of these. And the third is in the terms of better performance in one more specific language activities, and it's then matter of reception, production, interaction, or mediation. And then the fourth is in terms of optimal function operation in given domain, and this concerns the public domain, the occupational domain, the educational domain, or the personal domain. In terms of the enrichment of diversification of strategies, or in terms to the fulfillment of tasks related to the management of action linked to the learning and use of one or more languages, and the discovery or experience of another cultures. Okay. And the last is the complementary of partial objectives. Defining language, teaching or learning objective in this manner in terms of the major components of a general reference model or of each of the subcomponents of these is not a mere stylistic exercise. It illustrates the possible diversity of learning aims and the variety to be found in the provision of teaching. And then the second subchapter is the processes of language learning. The processes of language learning, the process acquisition or learning. Okay, language acquisition may be used either as the general term or confined. The verses 2 interpretations of the language non-native speakers in terms of current theories of universal grammar. And this work has almost a branch of theoretical psycholinguistic of little or no direct concern to practitioner, especially since grammar is considered to be far removed from accessibility to consciousness. Okay, and the second is to untutored knowledge and ability to use a non-native language resulting either from direct exposure to text or from direct participant in communicative events. Okay, and then language learning. Again, language learning may be used as the general term or confined to the process whereby language ability is gained as the result of planned process, especially by formal studying and institutional setting. Next, how do learners learn? How do learners learn? Some theorists believe that the human information processing abilities are strong enough for it to be sufficient for a human being to be exposed to sufficient understandable language for him or her to acquire the language and be able to use it both understanding and for production. They believe that acquisition process to be inaccessible to observation or intuition, and that it cannot be facilitated by conscious manipulation, whether by teaching or by study methods. Okay, in addition to exposure to comprehensible input, active participant in communicative interaction is a necessary and sufficient condition for language development. They too consider that explicit teaching or study of the language is irrelevant. There is considerable variation among learners of different ages, types, and background as to which of these elements they respond to most fruitfully, and among teachers, course writers, etc., as to the balance of elements provided in course according to the importance they attach to production versus reception, accuracy versus fluency, and etc. And the third subchapter is kind of framework user to facilitate language learning. Okay, this concern with the examination and qualification, we'll have to consider which learning parameters are relevant to the qualification concerned and the level required. And the second is authorities. When drawing up curricular guidelines or formulating syllabuses may concentrate on the specification of learning objective. In doing so, they may specify only higher level objectives in terms of task, themes, competence, and etc. Again, the third is textbook writer. Textbook writers and course designers are not obligated, though they may well wish to do so. And then the teachers are generally called upon to respect any official guidelines, use textbooks and course materials. They may or may not be in a position to analyze, evaluate, select, and supplement. Okay, and then learners have to develop the competence and strategies. Okay, subchapter number 4. Subchapter 4. Some methodological option for modern language learning and teaching. This is the first that I'd like to explain is about general approaches. By direct exposure to authentic use language in language 2, in one or more of the following ways. The first is face-to-face with native speakers, and then overhearing conversation, listening to the radio, recordings, or etc., watching and listening to the TV, video, and etc., and then reading unmodified, uncreated, authentic written text, using computer programs, and then participating in computer conferences or on offline conferences. Okay. And the last is participating in course in another curriculum subject which employ the second language as a medium of instruction. Okay, by direct exposure to specially selected spoken utterance and written text in second language. And then the third is by direct participation in authentic communicative interaction in second language, for example, as a conversation partner with a competent interlocutor. And the fourth is by direct participant in especially devised and constructed tasks in second language. The fifth is autodidactically, okay, by guided self-study, pursuing negotiated, self-directed objectives and using available instructional media. And then next, by a combination of presentation, explanation, or drill, exercise, and exploitation activities. But the first language as the language of classroom management and explanation. And then next is by combination of activities in the first language, but using second language only for all classroom purposes. And the next is by some combination of the above activities, starting perhaps with the first language, but but progressively reducing the use of first language and including more tasks and authentic tasks spoken and written and increasing self-study component. And the last is by combining the above with group and individual planning, implementation, and evaluation of classroom activity with teacher support, negotiating interaction to satisfy different learner needs, and etc. And that's the general. And the second is consideration should be given to the relative roles of teachers, learners, and media. What different proportions of class time may be expected to be spent? All right, by the teacher explaining, etc. to the whole class. Yeah, actually, yes. The explaining the teachers to the whole class. And then in whole class question and answer session, distinguish between referential, display, and task question. And then in group or pairing working. And then in individual working. And next, teachers should realize that the teacher's actions reflecting their attitudes and abilities are the most important part of the environment for language learning or acquisition. What importance is attached to their teaching skills, classroom management skills, ability to engage in action research and to reflect on experience, teaching styles, understanding of and ability to handle testing and assessment and evaluation. And then knowledge of and ability to teach sociocultural background information. And then intercultural attitudes and skill. And then knowledge of and ability to develop students' aesthetic appreciation of literature. And the last is ability to deal with individualization within classes containing diverse learners types. All right. How far should learners be expected to require to follow all and only the teacher's instruction in a disciplined, orderly way, speaking only when called upon to do so, and then participate actively in the learning process in cooperation with the teacher and other students to reach agreement on objective and methods, setting compromise and engaging in peer teaching and peer assessment so as to progress steadily towards autonomy. And the third is work independently with self-study materials, including self-assessment. And the last is compete with each other. And then next, what use can and should be made of instructional media, especially audio and video cassettes or computers. The verse is known for whole class demonstration, repetition, etc. in a language or video computer elaborating mode, in an individual self-instructional mode, and as a basis of group work. In international computer networking of school classes and individual students. Next is what part should be played? What part should be played by text in language learning and teaching? The first is how many learners be expected or required to learn from spoken and written text. The first is by simple exposure. The second is by simple exposure to, but ensuring that new material is intelligible by inferencing from verbal context, visual support, and etc. And the third is by exposure with comprehension, monitored and answered by the second language question and answer, multiple choices, multiple choice, picture matching, and etc. And the fourth is same as the third point, but with one more of the following, more comprehension test in the first language, explanation in first language, explanation including any necessary and hoc translation in second language, systematic pupil or student translation of text into first language, and free listening and or group listening activities and free reading activities. The next is how far should the written or spoken text presented to the learners be? Authentic. What is authentic? Produced for communicative purposes with no language teaching intent. And the second is spatially composed for use in language teaching. How far should learners have not only to process, but also to produce text? This may be for spoken and written, yeah? Spoken, written text read aloud. So we should read aloud the written text, and then oral answer to exercise questions, and then reproduction of memorized text, plays and poems maybe, and then pair and group work exercises, contribution to formal and informal discussion, free conversation in class or during pupil exchange, and then the last is presentation. And for written, dictated passages, and then written exercises, essays, translations, written reports, project work, letters to pen friends, okay, pen pal, contribution to class links using fax or email. And the next is how far should learners be expected or required to learn from tasks and activities? By simple participant in spontaneous activities. By simple participant in tasks and activities planned as as to type, polls, input, outcomes, and then participant rules on activities and etc. By participation not only in the task, but in pre-planning as well as post-mortem analysis and evaluation. And the last is same like the third point, but also with explicit awareness raising as the goal, the nature and structure of the task, requirements of participant roles, and etc. Okay, the next is the development of learners' ability to use communicative strategies. Yeah, assumed to be transferable from the learner's first language using or facilitated by creating situation and setting tasks, for example, role play and stimulation is. And the third point, same with the second point, but using awareness raising techniques. All right, and the last is same like the second also, but encouraging, requiring learners to focus on the follow explicit strategic for users as the needs arises. And as the general competences, learning a new language doesn't mean starting afresh. The position with regard to sociocultural knowledge and intercultural skills development is somewhat different. It's different, okay? And how then should the general non-language specific competences be treated in language course? Assumed to exist already or be developed elsewhere, and then conducted in the first language sufficiently to be taken for granted in second language teaching. And the third is treat as hoc as and when problems arise. And then by selecting constructing texts that illustrate new areas and items of knowledge. Through an intercultural component design to raise awareness, and then through role play and simulations. And then through subject teaching using second language as the medium of instruction. And then through direct contact with native speakers and authentic texts. With regard to existential competence, the learner's personality features motivation, attitude, beliefs, etc. may be ignored the learner's personal concern and taken into account in planning and monitoring the learning process. Include as an objective of the learning program. Okay, this is a record to ability to learn, yeah? Learners may be expected required to develop their study skills and heuristic skills. And the linguistic competence is a central, indispensable aspect of language learning. How may it best be facilitated in relation to vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and orthography? You may read it in CEFR book, everyone, and you may read in this slide. And the next is about formal exercises. There are gap filling, sentence construction on a given model, multiple choice, category substitution exercises, sentence merging, translation of example sentences, and then question and answer involving use of particular structures. Okay. And grammar focus fluency exercises. The next is pronunciation and orthography. How should learners be expected required to development for ability to pronounce a language? Simply by exposure to authentic spoken utterance, by course limitation, and then by individualized language laboratory work, and by reading aloud phonetically weighted textual material, by ear training and phonetic drilling. And F as same as the fourth point, and also fifth point, but with the use of phonetically transcribed text. And then the next is by expliciting phonetic training and by learning orthographic conventions. And the last is by some combination of the above. All right, and the next is orthography. How should learners be expected or required to develop their ability to handle the writing system of language? Okay, orthography talk about writing system, yeah. By symbol transform from first language, by exposure to authentic written text, and then by memorization of the alphabet concerned with the associated phonetic values, and then by practicing cursive writing and nothing to the characteristic national handwriting conventions, and then by memorizing word forms and punctuation conventions, and by the practice of dictation. Next is about the learner's sociolinguistic competence and learner's pragmatic competence by exposure to the authentic language used appropriately in its social settings, yeah, for sociolinguistic competences. By selecting or constructing texts that exemplify sociolinguistic contrast between the society of origin and the target society, by drawing attention to sociolinguistic contrast, by waiting for errors to be made, then marking, analyzing, and explaining them and giving the correct usage. Okay, and the last is as the part of explicit teaching of sociocultural component in the study of modern language. And for learners' pragmatic competences, assumed to be transferable from education and general experience in the mother tongue or the first language are facilitated. The second is by progressively increasing to the complexity of discourse structures and the functional range of text presented to the learner. The fourth is by setting tasks that require a wide functional range and adherence to verbal exchange patterns by awareness raising and by explicit teaching and exercising functions, verbal exchange patterns, and discourse structure. Okay, this is the last about errors and mistakes. What is errors? Errors are due to an interlanguage, a simplified or distorted representation of the target competence, and mistakes occur in performance when a user or a learner doesn't bring his competences properly in action. Okay, the different attitudes may be taken to the learner's errors. Errors and mistakes are evidence of value learned. Errors and mistakes are evidence of inefficient teaching, and then errors and mistakes are evidence of the learner's willingness to communicate this despite risk. Errors are an inevitable transient product of the learner's developing interlanguage, and mistakes are inevitable in all language use, including that of native speakers. And then the action to be taken with regard to learner mistakes and errors may be all errors and mistakes should be immediately corrected by a teacher, okay? Immediate peer correction should be systematically encouraged to eradicate errors. All errors should be noted and corrected at a time when doing so does not interfere with communication. So errors should not be simply corrected, but also analyzed and explained at appropriate time. Mistakes, which are mere slips, should be passed over, but the systematic error should be eradicated. And then errors should be corrected only when they interfere with communication. And then errors should be accepted as a transitional interlanguage and ignored. Okay, the next is what use is made of the observation and analysis of learner errors. In planning future learning and teaching on an individual or group basis, in course planning and materials development, and in the evaluation and assessment of learning and teaching. Okay, that's all about the 6th chapter, everyone. Do you get it? I hope that you get it. All right. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that all of them will be useful for all of us. See you on the next chapter. Bye-bye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.